Here we are at what used to be called Jenkins Heights once more, now Capitol Hill. That's the Capitol building. As you can see, all the seats are packed, and this is the red carpet central entrance. Behind it, the bronze doors through which the president will come. You can see just on the left of center George Reedy, the president's press advisor and press secretary. And a moment ago, we saw Rufus Youngblood, the Secret Service agent who possibly saved President Johnson's life in the disaster in Dallas in November, who carries the text of the president's inaugural address, which, as we've told you, may be one of the shortest ones. Here's Lady Bird Johnson and a relative.
See if we can't find out what
looking very young indeed
member
today, and I'm sure enjoying every moment of this. We come back now to the VIPs, and still more descending down to the places where they will sit for the inauguration address and the oath-taking, the swearing-in. There is a cheer from the crowd as Mrs. Johnson appears.
Mrs. Johnson
is soft-spoken, a deceptively soft-spoken lady who is very charming but a very strong figure, and whose investments enabled her husband to devote his full time to politics.
Howard, Mrs. Johnson is wearing a striking red coat with black trimmings, a very dashing figure indeed, reminding one in some respects of the mien of Jacqueline Kennedy in 1961. Shaking hands now, Mrs. Johnson, with members of her family and other dignitaries. There is Chief Justice Warren. He's just passing him. There is Mrs. Warren. And immediately in front of the First Lady now, as if by magic, materializes Mrs. Hubert Humphrey. That would be on your left, on Lady Bird Johnson's right. Chief Justice to the right of the screen, tall, dignified former governor of California, appointed Chief Justice by President Dwight Eisenhower. There is what looks very seriously like Lucy Baines Johnson. I may be wrong.
Yes. 16 years of age. She's a senior in a high school here in Washington.
And she took her exams early because, Howard, somebody said that she would be frantic if she took them this inaugural week. There comes the Vice President-elect Hubert Humphrey, followed by Speaker McCormick of the House, who will swear him in.
Ed, we might point out that if something happened to President Johnson 1 minute before 12, Mr. McCormick on the left would become president. If something happened 1 minute after 12, Mr. Humphrey on the right would become president.
Now the Marine Band is striking up the martial airs as the Vice President-elect descends to his place on the podium, looking composed. This is certainly the highlight of the life of a former pharmacist from South Dakota and ex-mayor of Minneapolis. He tried mightily to win the Democratic nomination for president in 1960 and bowed to John F. Kennedy, and then became one of Kennedy's chief lieutenants on Capitol Hill, and in turn a vital confidant in the Senate of President Johnson.
Ed Morgan pointed out in the Democratic Convention that Hubert Humphrey was an ABC man who made it. Hubert Humphrey was one of our commentators for that convention, but we had to lose him because he became nominated for Vice President of the United States on the Democratic ticket.
Technically, he's been a man, there he is again now, he's been a man without a job since about the 2nd of January when he resigned his Senate post to give seniority to the former Attorney General of Minnesota, now Senator Mondale, and he doesn't take his new job at a $43,000 a year salary until noon today. But when I asked him about his joblessness the other day, he said, look, anybody that works for Lyndon Johnson is not without work.
The Humphreys have moved to the Mayflower Hotel for the duration of these festivities. They live in a rather small house in Chevy Chase outside the district. Mrs. Humphrey wants to stay there, but President Johnson wants them to move in a big house so they can take care of some of the public and official entertaining.
Indeed, there's been a sort of a game of what might be called musical houses, Howard. The president wants the vice president to have an official dwelling. That would have to involve action of the Congress. But apart from the dwelling, which hasn't been settled, Vice President-elect Humphrey hoped he would have a layout, a suite of rooms in the Capitol comparable to that of his predecessor, Vice President Johnson. And here in this new $22 million East Wing, there had been some suites of rooms laid out for him, but lo and behold, when the Vice President-elect went to claim them, he found 3 other senators, including Senator John McClellan of Arkansas, had already staked a claim, and in all decorousness and in deference to the protocol of the most exclusive club in the world, the 100-member Senate, he did not challenge Senator McClellan's claim on those suites.
Ed, I'm not sure he could, you know. I think that emphasizes that this is the Congress's affair here. The president can suggest things to be included in the program, but this is Congress's invitation to the president to come here. In fact, these outdoor things began because Congress once refused to let a president, James Monroe, use an inside room to be sworn in, so they began moving out here. And we're the only nation that has outdoor inaugurations or coronations. Well, it's packed now, as you can see. And Hubert Humphrey is there for perhaps the greatest moment in his life. It's almost hard to recall from his present eminence that he was a firebrand when he began. He forced a strong civil rights plank into the platform of the Democratic Party in 1948. And his new eminence, does that mean he's turned right? I doubt it. I think if you read that platform, you will find it much tamer than the Civil Rights Bill Hubert Humphrey helped put through Congress in the last session, which helped to make him the vice presidential nominee and the vice president.
The weather here at the Capitol today on Jenkins Hill, which used to be a cow pasture about 150 years ago, is as nearly perfect as this correspondent has seen it in covering inaugurations since President Eisenhower's first in January 1953. You might almost call this Eisenhower weather. It is not exactly clear. There are scuds of thin cotton clouds in the sky on both sides of the Capitol dome as we look out of our window, but the temperature is crawling up inevitably toward the 40s, almost a March-like day, except for the spanking breeze from the southeast and the threat of snow, which blanketed this Capitol just exactly a year ago in blizzard-like proportions, almost up to 8 inches, is nowhere in sight. And the president can take this, perhaps, certainly some of the writers will take it as an omen. There is Lucy Baines again, and Mrs. Johnson now talking to the vice president-elect. And there is Mrs. Hubert Humphrey, Muriel Humphrey. One has noted in Mrs. Humphrey a great enjoyment in these last few weeks. The wife of a politician, like the wife of a politician leads a life not unlike that of a policeman. It is not a happy one. But this great crunch of the 1964 campaign over, Mrs. Humphrey looks as if she is enjoying every minute of it, even though her cares and responsibilities in a very real sense will be enhanced now. An interesting scene there. The younger daughter of the president and Mrs. Johnson on the left. That's a rather lovely, soft, pinkish velvet hat that Mrs. Earl Warren has contrived.
Chief Justice Warren was a bipartisan governor of California, and today we have the nearest thing to a bipartisan president we've had since the era of good feelings in James Monroe. No other president has acquired so many votes from the opposing party as President Johnson has, rather in a similar way to Governor Earl Warren in his days as governor of California. Here comes the president now, the president with John McCormick behind him, and B. Everett Jordan, the senator, the junior senator, though he is 68 years old, the junior senator from North Carolina, who is the chairman of this whole function and whose assistant will hold the Bible and be the very center of this tableau when the president is sworn in. There's the president. He's smiling a little now, rather different from his original appearance when he came out of the White House and looked extremely serious. Hail to the chief.
Comes the president down the red carpeted stairs and the 45th inaugural ceremony of the Republic of the United States of America is about officially to begin. The President is wearing not morning clothes, but by his choice, a business suit, the first time a president has so chosen since Franklin D. Roosevelt in the middle of the war and chose to be inaugurated at the White House. The President has taken his seat. Secretary of State Dean Rust immediately to his right and behind him, almost in the middle of your screen now.
This inaugural address is the one statement by a president that he aims at history with on purpose. A lot of his others make history without being planned that way, but this is the one he seeks to stake his claim to a place in history, to outline what he aims to do, what he can do, and to appeal to the people of the United States to follow him in that course. President Johnson will make a speech which is about 1,500 words long. The average length of speeches, inauguration addresses, is about 2,000 words. That's 2 columns of newsprint. However, one president made one 5 times as long.
President-elect, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens.
This is Senator
In the highest
Jordan
tradition
speaking.
of our form of government, we are here today to inaugurate the 36th President of the United States. It is a great honor for me as chairman of the Committee on Arrangements for this event to begin our program by presenting the United States Marine Band under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Schoper, who will now play a song we all love, Stars and Stripes Forever.
Who is the latecomer there, Bob, just going into a seat? Well, they're still in the aisle. The airman is directing him to a seat. See him?
This is the United States Marine Band playing now, previous to the beginning of the program. Senator Jordan, who introduced this band, is the chairman of the Joint Congressional Inauguration Committee and presumably will preside over proceedings, which I think Senator John Sparkman did last time, 4 years ago.
That's
when
correct, Howard.
Kennedy was there.
Things have been going so much like clockwork so far that a couple of the VIPs found themselves latecomers after the president, which is considered somewhat a breach of etiquette. So far, everything has been going without a hitch. You might even say, in deference to the Texas flavor, without a half hitch. The Republicans are not represented today in their loftiest status, which is not particularly unsurprising. Senator Goldwater, the defeated candidate, now ex-Senator Goldwater of Arizona, is not here. He's flying to New York on unspecified business. Richard Nixon, the defeated candidate in 1960, is in New York and is flying today to Minneapolis on business. General Eisenhower, the only living Republican ex-president, is in Palm Desert, California, and may or may not play golf, depending on the weather. Herbert Hoover, who had been alive 4 years ago, flew up to the ceremony from Miami to attend the ceremony for John F. Kennedy, but was forced to return to Florida by bad weather. There is the profile of Hubert Humphrey, which will become more and more familiar to the American public and the world at large as these next 4 years of the so-called Great Society unfold. Beyond him, the female profile, of course, is that of the First Lady of the United States.
Senator Jordan again.
Will the audience now rise as the Most Reverend Robert E. Lacey pronounce the invocation?
Almighty and eternal God, we ask a blessing upon all who are gathered here today to honor the Chief Executive and the Vice President of our nation. We thank thee for peace and prosperity. We are grateful for fertile soil, abundant harvest, and the fruits of the earth by which we live. But we remember that man does not live by bread alone. And so we are grateful, too, for the spiritual heritage of our nation, a sense of justice to all mankind, a spirit of charity to the lowly and the oppressed. In thy divine providence, O Heavenly Father, the moral leadership of the world has been entrusted to us. The fate of humanity is in our hands. The nations look to us for survival. Western civilization stands or falls with America. In these days of tragedy and crisis, all that we hold dear is challenged. Belief in God, respect for human personality, honor, integrity, the very freedom of the human spirit. All these are at stake, and our country, champion of truth and justice, must lead the nations of the world to the dawn of a brighter hope. We pray that Almighty God may grant to the leader of our country wisdom and understanding, strength and courage. In these days of stress and strife, in the hour of fateful decision, may God make clear to our President the path of honor and of peace, the path of freedom and justice, the path of brotherhood and truth, that truth that makes men free. Amen.
Archbishop Lucy, born in Los Angeles, is 73 years of age, and a hearty 73 he is. He has been a friend of Lyndon Johnson for 4 years. The president was struck by his work in behalf of migrant farm workers and low-paid highway laborers. He is now the Archbishop of San Antonio.
We will now be favored with another number from the United States Marine Band.
We have three Texas clerics here today who will say prayers, and one, the fourth, is the Archbishop, the Greek Orthodox prelate, who was born in Turkey.
I believe he's the only one, Howard, who participated among the clerics for the inauguration of John F. Kennedy.
There are huge masses, as you can see out there. The crowd's tremendous, and the crowds have always been large for these. It was not until President Harding in 1921 that they had a public address system. Up to that time, presidents had to reach those huge crowds, which have not got larger, by lung power. Today, they have a very excellent public address system, and every word will be heard, not only here, but incidentally, this is the first inauguration, parts of which will be carried by a Telstar, so people in other parts of the world will hear and see this at approximately the same time as we do.
The inauguration of Calvin Coolidge was the first to be broadcast by radio. That is to say, his inauguration after election. He was, needless to say, on the death of Warren Harding, sworn in at his father's home in New England in the middle of the night, but on his public inauguration in 1925. The world, technically at least, has come a long way since then, and who knows what other gadgets will be invented in the 4-year space between now and 1969, when another president will be inaugurated here. Probably, some people say, Lyndon Baines Johnson himself, but no one can tell. Other people thought that it would be John F. Kennedy, as they were projecting forward from 4 years hence of 1961. There is Linda Bird Johnson, the older of the two Johnson daughters, who is growing up to be a hostess in her own right. A mixture of seriousness and gladness, no doubt, in that young lady's mind. She's nodding her head in time to the rhythm of the band. Mrs. Humphrey. In a way, it's fortunate that so far nobody has invented an X-ray gadget to measure the emotions of these people. They are private, even though they are public figures. In some respects, Lady Bird Johnson is a combination of Jacqueline Kennedy, Dolly Madison, Bess Truman, a completely distinctive person in her own right. Jolly, vivacious, a businesswoman who has handled the Johnson television properties in Texas profitably before her husband became vice president and then president. An untiring politician's wife who has to attend innumerable receptions, as she did on Monday afternoon with Mrs. Humphrey for some several thousand diplomats. Excuse me, Howard, go ahead.
It would take a very sharp eye to see it, but just above that banister there is plate glass, armor plate glass, which would deflect bullets. Just a short quantity of it, not as much as before the presidential reviewing stand. Here comes Senator Jordan again.
We will now have the pleasure of hearing a special arrangement of America the Beautiful by Miss Leontine Price, accompanied by the United States Marine Band.
I said mistakenly that Miss Price was going to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, and Senator Jordan has corrected.
For spacious skies, for amber wheels of grain, for purple mountains' majesty, for rooted trees, America, God shed His grace on thee. From sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for picture a dream that sees beyond the hills. Thine alabaster cities gleam, who seemed human till America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining
Miss Leontine Price, by the way, is a native of Laurel in the state of Mississippi.
Now, there is the grave of John F. Kennedy with the eternal torch in Arlington Cemetery.
Will now lead us in prayer.
What memories, painful, mixed with triumph, must be going through the minds of the Kennedy family today, wherever they are.
Almighty God, we thank Thee for this inaugural, the living historic witness to our faith in Thee, and to the choice and actions of a free people. Here at the capital of our nation, the very sight of which exalts our hearts and awakens thrilling memories of the preeminent men of our resplendent past. We pray for Thy blessings upon our beloved President, the Vice President, and those associated with them in the sacred trust of leadership. As Lyndon Baines Johnson and Hubert Horatio Humphrey each places his hand on the Bible to take his oath of office, let them know and let us feel that the hands of all of us join theirs in this symbolic avowal that thou art supreme, and thy holy word our eternal challenge. We ask for no miracles beyond the miracle which is always with us, if we will only use it. The power of love to transform foes into friends, slaves into freemen, the curse of war and poverty into the benediction of concord and plenty. May this inauguration, O Lord, mark the renewal of a people unafraid of the tasks of greatness, a turning point in American history when we move closer to the realization of President Johnson's dream of a better life for every citizen, and of uniting with all who are dedicated to the continuance of humanity's immemorial heroic journey toward freedom and prosperity, justice and peace. Amen.
Another Texan by adoption, Rabbi Hyman Judah Schachtel, that was. He was born in London, grew up in Buffalo, went to Houston, Texas in 1943, now serves Congregation Beth Israel in Houston. He has known the President of the United States for 15 years.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives will now administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic?
I, Hubert Horatio Humphrey, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That you take this obligation freely.
I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office about which I am about to enter.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Ladies and gentlemen, the United States has a Vice President of the United States for the first time in 14 months since the death of President Kennedy.
The man who administered the oath of office, Speaker McCormick, had been until that moment next in line for the presidency if anything had happened to President Johnson. Senator Jordan.
The Reverend George R. Davis will now lead us in prayer. Please rise.
God of our fathers, to whom persons are of supreme importance, we lift up this day a man to be set apart in a special way. In our love and prayers through this historic and exalting ceremony, we lift him up as we do the Vice President and their gracious families. To thy strong help we commend them and all men and women in all areas and branches of our nation's life who share the terrible splendor of leadership and authority. Bless, guard, and keep thy servant Lyndon Baines Johnson, that he may prosper in the sacred task to which he has been called by the decisive will of the people and by divine providence. We thank thee for his magnificently significant service to his nation and the world, already written on history's scroll. For his gallantry and stability seen in times of greatest peril and in dire tragedy, as well as in the daily routine of his never-ending duties, we thank thee. For his careful preparation for such a time as this by hard discipline and patient attention to details, we thank thee. For all of his skills in the political sciences and arts, and for his insights into our ways of government, we voice our gratitude to thee, giver of all good gifts to men. To the President and the Vice President, continue thy help, and to all those whose judgments and loyalties they must be able to rely upon. Grant our President not to grow weary, as he must remind us we are one people, and that we are but one of many worthy nations and an inspiring family of nations. For thus, God of all the worlds, our dreams, our efforts, and our sacrifices thou wilt redeem, to give them universal meaning and purpose. Uphold him, that he may encouraging us to be able increasingly to reason together, to seek an essential consensus, to live in our strange and wonderful diversity with stable unity. Uphold our President, O God, as he leads us onward toward that great and desirable society of persons who seek real worth, a society in which none shall live in fear, because justice, mercy, and brotherhood will flourish in the earth. Thus we pray in the name of him who is the wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Amen.
The Reverend Dr. Davis was pastor in Wichita Falls, Texas, before coming to the National City Christian Church in Washington 4 years ago. As a member of that denomination, the Disciples of Christ, President Johnson has attended Dr. Davis'
The oath of office will
more
now
than
be
any other
administered
in Washington.
to the President by the Chief Justice of the United States.
Now the moment.
But the remarkable note on the podium is that not a clerk of the Supreme Court, but Lady Bird Johnson is holding the Bible on which the President will be sworn in.
I will faithfully execute
the office of the Presidency of the United States.
the office of the Presidency of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability,
And will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
Help me God.
My best wishes.
My fellow countrymen, on this occasion, the oath together. We are one nation and one people. Our fate as a nation and our future as a people rests not upon one citizen, but upon all citizens. That is the majesty and the meaning of this moment. For every generation, there is a destiny. For some, history decides for this generation the choice must be our own. Even now, a rocket moves toward Mars. It reminds us that all who made the journey would share in the fruits of the land. In a land of great wealth, families must not live in hopeless poverty. In a land rich in harvest, children just must not go hungry. In a land of healing miracles, neighbors must not suffer and die untended. In a great land of learning and scholars, young people must be taught to read and write. For more than 30 years that I have served this nation, I have believed that this injustice to our people, that the world will not be the same for our children or even for ourselves in a short span of years. They came here, the exile and the stranger, brave but frightened, to find a place where a man could be his own man. They made a covenant with this land, conceived in justice, written in liberty, bound in union. It was meant one day to inspire the hopes of all mankind, and it binds us still. If we keep its terms, we shall flourish. First, justice was the promise. Waste of our resources was our real enemy. For 30 years or more, with the resources I have had, I have vigilantly fought against it. I have learned and I know that it will not surrender easily. But change has given us new weapons. Before this generation of Americans is finished, this enemy will not only retreat, it will be conquered. Justice requires us to remember when any citizen denies his fellow, saying his color is not mine, or his beliefs are strange and different, in that moment he betrays America, though his forebears created this nation. Liberty was the second article of our covenant. It was self-government. It was our Bill of Rights. But it was more. America would be a place where each man could be proud to be himself, stretching his talents, rejoicing in his work, important in the life of his neighbors and his nation. This has become more difficult in a world where change and growth seem to tower beyond the control and even the judgment of men. We must work to provide the knowledge and the surroundings which can enlarge the possibilities of every citizen. The American Covenant called on us to help show the way for the liberation of man. And that is today our goal. Thus, if as a nation there is much outside our control, as a people, no stranger is outside our hope. Change has brought new meaning to that old mission. We can never again stand aside, prideful in isolation. Terrific dangers and troubles that we once called foreign now constantly live among us. If American lives must end and American treasure be spilled in countries that we barely know, then that is the price that change has demanded of conviction and of our enduring covenant. Think of our world as it looks from that rocket that's heading toward Mars. It is like a child's globe hanging in space. The continents stuck to its side like colored maps. We are all fellow passengers on a dot of Earth. And each of us, in the span of time, has really only a moment among our companions. How incredible it is that in this fragile existence we should hate and destroy one another. There are possibilities enough for all who will abandon mastery over others to pursue mastery over nature. There is world enough for all to seek their happiness in their own way. And our nation's course is abundantly clear. We aspire to nothing that belongs to others. We seek no dominion over our fellow man, but man's dominion over tyranny and misery. But more is required. Men want to be part of a common enterprise, a cause greater than themselves. And each of us must find a way to advance the purpose of the nation, thus find new purpose for ourselves. Without this, we will simply become a nation of strangers. The third article is union. To those who were small and few against the wilderness, the success of liberty demanded the strength of the Union. 2 centuries of change have made this true again. No longer need capitalist and worker, farmer and clerk, city and countryside struggle to divide our bounty. By working shoulder to shoulder together, we can increase the bounty of all. We have discovered that every child who learns, and every man who finds work, and every sick body that's made whole, like a candle added to an altar, brightens the hope of all the faithful. So let us reject any among us who seek to reopen old wounds and rekindle old hatreds. They stand in the way of a seeking nation. Let us now join reason to faith and action to experience, to transform our unity of interest into a unity of purpose. For the hour and the day and the time are here to achieve progress without strife, to achieve change without hatred, not without difference of opinion, but without the deep and abiding divisions which scar the Union for generations. Under this covenant of justice, liberty, and union, we have become a nation, prosperous, great, and mighty. And we have kept our freedom. But we have no promise from God that our greatness will endure. We have been allowed by Him to seek greatness with the sweat of our hands and the strength of our spirit. I do not believe that the great society is the ordered, changeless, and sterile battalion of the ants. It is the excitement of becoming, always becoming, trying, probing, falling, resting, and trying again, but always trying and always gaining. In each generation, with toil and tears, we have had to earn our heritage again. If we fail now, then we will have forgotten in abundance what we learned in hardship. That democracy rests on faith. That freedom asks more than it gives. And the judgment of God is harshest on those who are most favored. If we succeed, it will not be because of what we have, but it will be because of what we are. Not because of what we own, but rather because of what we believe. nation of believers underneath the clamor of building and the rush of our day's pursuits. We are believers in justice and liberty and union, and in our own union. We believe that every man must someday be free. And we believe in ourselves. And that is the mistake that our enemies have always made. In my lifetime, in depression and in war, they have awaited our defeat. Each time, from the secret places of the American heart, came forth the faith that they could not see, or that they could not even imagine. And it brought us victory, and it will again. For this is what America is all about. It is the uncrossed desert and the unclimbed ridge. It is the star that is not reached, and the harvest. And to these trusted public servants, and to my family and those close friends of mine who have followed me down a long, winding road, and to all the people of this union and the world, I will repeat today what I said on that sorrowful day in November last year. I will lead, and I will do the best I can. But you must look within your own hearts to the old promises and to the old dreams. They will lead you best of all. For myself, I ask only in the words of an ancient leader, give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people. For who can judge this, thy people, that is so great?
Well, the boy who came here as a skinny string bean and a secretary to a politician in 1932, now 33 years later, is inaugurated as boss of the whole nation. His speech was a restatement, a little more lyrical than factual, of his plan for the Great Society, and that plan can be described as a bag full of unfinished business America's neglected in long years of concentration on foreign policy. Here's Senator Everett Jordan.
We will now have the pleasure of hearing a special selection by one of the world's greatest choirs, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, conducted by Richard P. Conde, which will now sing for us, "This Is My Country."
Mormon Tabernacle Choir, the Church of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, Utah. The choir was founded in 1867, 2 years short of a century ago. Senator Jordan.
The benediction will now be pronounced by His Eminence Archbishop Icavos, and please remain standing, and the United States Marine Band will play our national anthem.
Omnipotent and omniscient God, who in thy providence ordains that the destinies of men and nations upon this earth should be entrusted into the hands of the worthy, hearken, we beseech thee, to our thanksgiving, prayer, and supplication. From the time of the pilgrims and founding fathers of our nation, and throughout the course of our entire history, thou hast been our guiding light, our constant inspiration and illumination, and an inexhaustible source of reinforcement and fortitude. Having our trust in thee, we have raised under the splendor of thy skies the stars and stripes of our exalted ideals and national pursuits, and in the measure of thine loving kindness, we selflessly served the spiritual as well as the material welfare of our fellow men at home and abroad. We believe it is thy will that we continue in an unbroken continuity this honored tradition, And it is this belief that underlies the inaugural ceremonies and installation of our 36th President in the person of an honorable and dedicated servant of our people, Lyndon Baines Johnson. This inaugural ceremony, O Lord, is a most solemn act of rededication. We therefore pray to Thee to empower our beloved President, our Vice President, and their associates in the government of our nation to ever guard and preserve the image and beauty of our Commonwealth as the land of the free and the home of the brave. Shield and protect them from all ills, and enable us, O merciful One, to ever uphold the spirit that made our nation the hope of the distressed and the joy of the oppressed. We ask Thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, the all-holy, life-giving Trinity, and for the benefit of our nation and all nations believing or aspiring for freedom, justice, dignity, and peace. Amen.
Begun the campaign for 1968. 4 years is going to be one of great friendship. I don't think, Marlene, that I've ever seen quite as gregarious an individual. He loves to talk to everybody, and he wants to see everybody.
The band has stopped playing, I believe, waiting for some kind of signal to proceed.
I think they'd like to be reviewed, and when the president gets back to his seat, perhaps they'll talk and march again.
There was some concern about whether the people participating in the march would be warmly enough dressed, but I don't think anybody needs to worry today.
President Johnson is now saying hello to Margaret Truman and her husband,
Clifton Daniels.
Clifton Daniels of the New York Times. Margaret Truman looks very radiant in a dark coat and a white hat, standing up and exchanging a few words.
I think her father was very disappointed not to be here. He was the one former president that was going to come and had to cancel out.
His physician
His health, yes,
advised that he stay home. We're not going to go on talking about the weather all day, but we've got to say once again that we're very, very lucky indeed. All week we had been sitting here over Pennsylvania Avenue looking at the skies and watching the workmen clean snow off the top of the stands, and a great many of us, myself included, I have to admit, said that we felt snow in our bones.
I'm glad we were wrong.
President now greeting Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago and his wife, and working on down the line, exchanging again a few words.
Stands are quite filled up in this vicinity now. Earlier it was a little sparse, but now everybody's ready to see the big show.
We'll return in a moment to Inauguration 65 after a message from the Purex Corporation. There is a gorgeous view all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue from where we sit. Here, arriving, Governor Connolly of Texas and Mrs. Texas, probably President Johnson's very closest friends who are staying this marvelous day at the White House in the Lincoln Suite.
I think the governor and his wife are going to be in the presidential box, too, as soon as they arrive.
This is the shot of Pennsylvania Avenue again, just in front of the presidential. There's Dr. Billy Graham, who attended and conducted portions of the church service that President Johnson attended this morning.
One of the things we won't be seeing this afternoon, Peter, is representatives of the women's division of the military. The Wax and Waves, I'm sorry to say, have been eliminated from this parade. Billy Graham's watching things with interest now.
Apparently, my very capable director has just informed me that I've identified Mrs. Connolly as Mrs. Texas. Indeed, she's a beautiful woman.
Well, she is the first lady of the state now
Right.
that the Johnsons have moved to the White House.
So there is Governor Texas and Mrs. Connolly.
Now we've evened it up.
Blowing kisses to the crowd as they proceed down Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see they're not moving very quickly. And I, for one, am wondering just how long this parade is going to be held up as I crane my neck out. Here we go. That's as long as it's going to be held up. The President's back in his box. And down Pennsylvania Avenue comes the Southwest Texas State College contingent and the band.
About their legs being cold. They took the advice of Mrs. Freeman.
Well, I always knew, Marlene, they had beautiful girls in Texas.
There's the proof. They were clapping in time to the music in the president's box. Now they're giving them a hand. These girls dressed in red and white, beautiful costumes. This is a big moment for them.
Well, I would say, Marlene, that particular contingent went all the way in turning this occasion into a warm, festive, really happy one. Up till now, of course, we have been involved in what is a very important and in some respects a very somber ceremony. But now it's time for everybody to have fun. And as President Johnson relaxes in his presidential booth, we meet the U.S. Military Academy.
Standing in the presidential box to see this go by.
The cadets from West Point. You will notice in that contingent, no bayonets. Rifles are all unbayoneted, if that's a correct phrase. Another part of the security precautions exhibited today for this inauguration parade.
People along the route are being kept posted on the units by a loudspeaker system.
West Point colors. Go ahead.
of today's inaugural parade will soon take their place in our modern Navy, the most powerful assembly of sea power in the history of the world. This power has buried itself in the Navy. The Navy, of course, primarily designed to control the sea, which covers 70% of the globe. The proud and colorful 72-piece Naval Academy Band formed in 1853 is the oldest in the Navy.
Now President Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Vice President Humphrey greet the U.S. Naval Academy. Their famous theme song, Anchored Away.
The leader of the band is participating in his 4th inaugural parade. 72 pieces in this band.
The President and Vice President have now been joined for a review of the military academies on the presidential stand by Secretary Vance and Mrs. McNamara.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, approaching your vantage point, the United States Air Force Academy.
As the presidential inauguration parade passes by us, the U.S. Naval Academy, we will continue ABC's inauguration coverage after a pause for station identification.
Kate Smith plays hostess at the Hollywood Palace to Ben Blue, Trini Lopez, Mort Saul, and the London dance team of Desmond and Mark, Saturday night on ABC.
From Washington, D.C., ABC News is bringing you Inauguration 65, a complete report and commentary on the inauguration of Lyndon Baines Johnson as the 36th President of the United States of America. Reported by Howard K. Smith, Edward P. Morgan, Peter Jennings, and Marlene Sanders, leading the ABC News team. Inauguration 65 is being brought to you by Purex, maker of fine products for your home. This famous Purex trademark is your guarantee of best quality. When women speak, Purex listens. That's why we say you'll find the woman's touch in every Purex product. Here again are ABC's Marlene Sanders and Peter Jennings at the White House.
Passing beneath us, the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Marlene, Howard has already mentioned that I'm a Canadian, so I will admit in all honesty that this is the first time I've seen these military academies in performance, and they look tremendous. Now let's go down to the Treasury Corner where ABC's Murphy Martin stands by, ready to talk.
Governor John Connolly and his wife Nellie just approaching 15th at Pennsylvania here, and in his hand a microphone. We're going to try to talk with him a moment as he passes by here. Governor Connolly, can you hear me? Governor Connolly, there is no one as close to Lyndon Baines Johnson as you are. This is his great day. How is it affecting you? Is it your greatest day also?
Obviously, today a great happiness, joy, exhilaration, all affected.
Governor Connolly, you've known Lyndon Johnson longer than anyone else. Has he changed any at all since he has become president? Governor Connolly, no one ever looks at you in a parade. I'm quite certain that they don't remember a day back in November of 1963. Are you apprehensive when you ride in a parade in an open car as you are doing today?
To hide in a shell, you have to go on and do what you know you want to do and what you should do and what's expected of you, and that's about all you can do.
Governor Connolly, are you going to join the president when you reach the reviewing stand there?
Yes, we anticipate that we will.
Thank you very much for taking time during the parade, Governor Connolly.
You're very kind.
Governor Connolly moving up to the Pennsylvania side that will lead to the reviewing stand. Still waving to the crowd, the big smile on his face. His lovely wife, Nellie, seated as he is standing in the car. And as he turned our particular corner here, particularly Texans in this area, because they have set up in the hotel across the way to have what they call parade viewing parties, and particularly did they give him a big round of applause when he passed this particular vantage point. Still smiling all the while, about to make that turn that would lead him down to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the most famous address known. Speaking of that address, let's go back to the ABC anchor booth at the White House.
And we'll return to Inauguration 65 after a message from the Purex Corporation.
Sunshine, brought to you by B-R-I-L-L, oh my! Brillo spells shine.
The Merchant Marine Academy is going by right now. These are a smart-looking young group, and I think the president is giving them his undivided attention at the moment. He stopped talking for just a few minutes anyway.
We're still in the first division of this parade. There are 6 divisions to come. Immediately beneath us, the U.S. Army Field Band, and now the 82nd Airborne Division.
This is a famous division, and hats are being removed in the stands all along the way as they pass by, and they're getting a big hand.
Gained a large measure of their fame in World War II, where they fought valiantly in defense of Europe and their own country. They were particularly active in 1944, the invasion and later the reclaiming of the Netherlands from the Germans.
Receiving the band is the Governor of Texas, John Conway.
Governor Connolly is coming on, signifying the beginning of the non-military section of the parade. The civilian floats will be coming by from the various states. this year the states have been carefully restricted as to how much they could enter. 1 float, 1 marching unit, 1 band, and 1 governor.
And that gentleman you just saw and see again is Baden Langton, ABC's correspondent in Flash Unit number 1. And there is Governor Connolly, another of ABC's correspondents.
They're getting out of the car. They're going to enter the stand from this side.
Governor Connolly congratulating the University of Texas Longhorn Band.
It's Mrs. Johnson's alma mater.
They're dressed in a brilliant orange and white. Let's listen to them. Johnson looking on, and there it is, Texas. The eyes of Texas in this case are literally upon us.
And look, there's a real river of water in there. That beagle wagging his tail.
Pedernales River, the star of Texas, the LBJ Texas Ranch, and leading the way, him.
Band was one of the most typical looking of its state, all in wide-brimmed cowboy hats, very smart, and there the president's looking on now to give the vice president's state a little bit of his attention. Minnesota is next.
We get some Minnesota fans pretty close by.
The governor of Minnesota has just passed by, which means band can't be far behind.
We're very pleased to report, incidentally, as you may or may not have heard before, that John Connolly has fully recovered from that day, November 22nd, when he received a bullet wound. He still has some stiffness in his right wrist. Nothing affects his smile, as you can see. And
he's a very handsome man.
Well, there comes that woman's approach again.
Well,
one-track mind, Marlene. There's a slight lull in the parade now. In fact, there's the lull occurring now, which we anticipated would occur when President Johnson first arrived at the presidential reviewing stand. And you guessed it, the president has taken this opportunity to go and meet some more friends. He's now talking to, if I can see correctly, Mr. Adlai Stevenson, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, introducing Governor Connolly to some of the other people in the stands.
Mostly cabinet members in that section, I believe, Peter.
I wonder who's taking care of the shop. Up on the left,
Slightly
Mr.
bald
Rusk.
man, yes.
One thing about Mr. Rusk, he's easy to pick out in a crowd, provided he's not wearing his hat.
Wonder what's happening to the colonel in charge of this parade. He promised this wouldn't happen.
Who, Ray Levan? Oh, I can tell you where he is. He's at Third and Constitution, chewing his nails frantically.
Now we can hear the music. Something will be coming along soon.
The appearance of Secretaries Rusk and McNamara prompts one to note, as has been noted previously, but I think is worth remembering again, that there's going to be no display of military hardware in this year's parade, and there have been fewer troops, there will be fewer troops than in any past inaugural parade. Publicly, the inaugural committee said that the military hardware, the tanks, the mortars, the rockets, and the endless lines of the parade of troops rather made the parade too static. But privately, some of the committee members felt, and I entirely concur with them, that some past inaugural parades look a little like May Day parades, and if we're to talk about the Great Society, and if our parade is to be about the Great Society, what better keynote could we choose than peace?
Here comes Minnesota. University of Minnesota Marching Band.
Well, they're making, like the now Vice President Humphrey, their first appearance at an inauguration, their first appearance in this official capacity. And with them, as you're about to hear, with the University of Minnesota Marching Band comes naturally their college pep song, the Minnesota Rouser, George Meany, president of the AFL-CIO, looking on.
Theme of their float, accent on brain power. They have a good example in our new vice president. Power, and it says Minnesota proudly gives the nation its vice president, Hubert Humphrey.
Now, as we proceed the District of Columbia, we find in the lead car the president of the District of Columbia, and just prior to that, the Minnesota National Guard Band directly beneath.
Minnesota had no marching unit as such, just bands and float.
Speaker McCormick looking on, having played an enormous part in the inauguration ceremony, a key part, and now standing down in favor, in a sense, of Hubert Humphrey, looking on at this inauguration parade. This is the St. John's College Military High School Band, which has marched in every single inauguration parade since 1917, except one, and that was 1961.
District of Columbia always marches in this position, even though the order was changed for everyone else. They are the host, and that's why they come up third.
I think probably, Marlene, what's most particularly important about the D.C. contingent this year is that this is the first time the District of Columbia has ever voted for a president, first time in 100 years.
Now we have an ROTC unit, Joint Army Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps, cadet contingent from Howard University in Washington, D.C. They're marching very smartly. They won an award, as a matter of fact, for their marching at the World's Fair earlier, rather at the end of 1964.
And there you see the District of Columbia's float. District of Columbia, the float represents the district's desire for complete home rule, and it's expressed, if you can imagine, in 400 yards of white velveteen, and the young ladies on the front don't really need to be too aptly described.
They're wearing beautiful red robes.
It all says home rule now. It looks rather like a protest. I'm sure it's not.
There's a lot of tinsel in those gold medals.
And now an integral part of American life, even now, and will continue to be so. The Indian floats.
And they look wonderful on those horses, and now we have them. These are real Indians. Beautifully dressed, feathers, blue and white. All kinds of colors in their outfits.
45, Mr. Adlai Stevenson looking on, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And there's another of those beaming faces which are not put on, but very automatic.
And he's enjoying that Indian float, too. There's an Indian sitting there looming a rug, and I don't know how much work she got done on this parade. She had the opportunity.
Here's another one which represents the great heritage of the Indians, various views of the traditional Indian contributions to art and culture. There's Mr. Rusk, also mustering a very easy smile.
Well, the Indians are really well represented in this parade.
Well, they speak of great heritage, and of course they also speak of great progress.
A lady in a canoe, too. Vacation land.
This, of course, represents the various phases of development in Indian life in modern America: industry, conservation, and vacation land. To see Douglas Dillon.
Now we have Indians riding in jeeps. I think they looked a little bit better on the horses earlier, but red, white, and blue jeeps.
Well, they're all dressed, Marlene, according to their original tribal customs. And they're extremely colorful. The colors range from violent, shocking pinks to deep blues, feathers galore. And now, as Mr. McNamara looks on, we have a war dance. I'm not sure if that's particularly...
Oh, that's very impressive looking. Let's take a good look at these Indians dressed up as war birds of some kind. Very ferocious looking.
Leading the Delaware section of the second division is the official fly during the state governor.
Well, there's some of those horses you wanted to see, Marlene.
Now I feel better.
Following the float.
One is a little bit untamed there in the back.
Some people have been heard to comment that the horses in today's parade are going to get better treatment than the humans. There are a number of horse ambulances set up at various points in the route, particularly in case we had a cold day. The horses would have had a little trouble with their tendons and some of their legs as well.
We'll return to Inauguration 65 in a moment after this message from Curex. Now the parade continues with Delaware. Delaware is now officially first in the parade after the president, the vice president, and the host state of Washington, D.C., because they were the first state to enter the Union in 1787.
The opening marching contingent, the oldest in the unit, Delaware National Guard, which goes way back to around 1776, are dressed in the Revolutionary costumes. And when we talk of parade today, we talk, of course, of tribute and parade of history and a number of other phrases which on initial thought seem a little out of place. But when you look from where we are and you turn around and look down at the parade, you realize how absolutely true it is. Because the costumes, the uniforms which are represented here, both of the military units, even as far as the Eagle Scouts are concerned, as they stand before us.
Governor William Scranton just passed by. Now, Cardinal High School of Philadelphia coming up. Cardinal Doherty High School.
And a drum major. The band has recently been issued new uniforms styled from those worn on ceremonial occasions by the British Royal Regiment of Foot, the Goldstream Guard. This school has a total enrollment of 6,000 at the present time.
talking about the Johnson relatives all day and the Humphrey relatives. Well, if Governor Hughes had brought his whole family from Trenton, New Jersey to appear in this parade, it might well have run up to the Johnsons. Well, they've got 8 sons and 2 daughters.
New Jersey float won the prize given out last year for the best floats. I'm sure they'll come up with something interesting again this year.
This is the Rutgers University ROTC Marching Unit, and we'll listen to them. Once again, a colonial color guard, dressed this time in pre-revolutionary Jersey blue military uniform. We've come a long way in our quest and our search, as we still do search for the Great Society, and one of the ways in which I think we've progressed probably faster than any other, and some people think too fast, is in the field of communications. And the New Jersey float welcomes and salutes the field of communications with their satellites and their ancient telephones.
And this float, by the way, was donated by the Communications Workers of America. They've got a moving thing on top there. Interested spectators. Now, Georgia, and I'm really looking forward to the Georgia float coming up.
Well, although Lyndon Johnson lost the state of Georgia, he's got one of his closest friends, certainly in the South, in Governor Carl Sanders of Georgia. Handsome, articulate. He went right down the line for Johnson. And
he's
Johnson
not related to me,
away.
by the way.
Well, if he's handsome and articulate, if you maintain your same level of conversation, I think you'd like to be.
Well, I do think, though, that Texas and the Georgia governors represent our most attractive men in that office.
We see a lot of pennants at the beginning of parades, and that one from Dalton, Georgia, which you just saw pass off the right of your screen, is rather original. They carry as their pennant a roll of carpet. Dalton High School Band in Dalton, Georgia.
This is Justice William Douglas. I think we identified him as one of his...
we identified him as Justice Clark.
Justice Clark.
I'm sure today he won't mind.
No. Oh, this is a smart-looking band.
This is the Georgia Military Academy, and they're the largest military prep school in the country. And as you can see, like all the units, they dip their pennants. There's the Dixie flag.
And there is
President Johnson.
There's the whistle stop train that Georgia has decided to contribute as its float.
You were on that, Marlene.
I sure was, and I'm anxious to see it. There it comes down the track, so to speak, flashing its light. There's Everett Dirksen looking on.
He made some very marvelous comments earlier today, as did a number of Republicans, and it's indicative of the unanimity that exists, nonpartisan approach to this great day.
Well, I tell you something about this train. This looks more like something made out of candy than the one we were on, with all its stripes and colors, and there are the girls waving from the windows. Actually, they are President Johnson's in their hand. These were called the Southern Belles that came along and extended their hospitality to people along the way and to the reporters who went on that very fine trip through the South.
See if we can catch a glimpse of the rear car where Mrs. Johnson spent much of her time, for her press secretary, Liz Carpenter's daughter, is one of the young ladies who is portraying Mrs. Johnson on this. And Donna Lindeberg is portraying Liz Johnson.
We'll continue Inauguration 65 after this message.
Inauguration 65 is being presented by Purex, maker of fine products for your home, including Liquid Trend for dishes and hand washables, Dutch Cleanser in the all-plastic container, Sweetheart Soap. From Washington, D.C., ABC News continues its coverage of Inauguration 65. Here again are Marlene Sanders and Peter Jennings at the White House.
Connecticut is now passing by. They have a float having to do with the March of Dimes, and we'll see what they have in mind. You know, most of these floats were supposed to have something to do with the Great Society, and I think if we look hard enough, we can justify almost all of them on those grounds.
Well, Connecticut boasts that they carry the biggest dime in the world on their float, Marlene, but it won't buy anything. Made of tinfoil.
And we're moving
Governor
along.
John Volpe, the Republican governor from Massachusetts, he effectively lasted through that great Democratic tide last November in a normally Democratic state. President Johnson applauds him as well. Speaking of people who should be applauded, we welcome back to our booth Howard K. Smith. Nice to have you. Trouble getting here, Howard?
And Ed Morgan just came in the door, too. They made their way finally down from the Capitol.
Well, Massachusetts first entered this union back in 1788. Bay State, well, the old colony as it's often referred to, means in Indian large hill place. And they're represented by the Crusaders Drum and Bugle Corps from Boston. I thought at one point, in fact, we'd been told emphatically, Marlene, that the bands weren't going to play when they came by President Johnson. And in fact, this is the first one that has.
Well, I'm glad they changed their minds. I've been enjoying the music. I don't know about you. An all-brass band. It might have been quite noisy if it had been playing, aside from the drums.
We need to take this moment to remind you now that later on this evening on most of the ABC stations around the country, ABC Scope will replay the highlights of today's inauguration broadcast. So if you have missed even part of the inauguration parade, or if you'd like to see much of it again, watch ABC Scope tonight on ABC, and we will recreate for you, or replay for you at least, the highlights of this important day in 1965 for President Johnson. Marlene?
Well, Maryland is the next state coming in, entered the Union in 1788, and they're not going to have a float. It's surprising how many states have decided not to, but perhaps they had such a hard time coming up with an idea. I spoke to the New York delegation and asked them how did they ever come to a decision on what to enter. I could picture them arguing in smoke-filled rooms endlessly, but they said they decided to ask commercial artists, free of charge, to volunteer designs, and that's how they finally did it, which was probably a good idea.
Well, Maryland entered the Union in 1788, and they're represented, their marching unit at least, by the Leonard Hall Naval School cadets from Leonardtown, Maryland, and their uniforms are styled closely after Annapolis uniforms. These are, of course, the colonial uniforms, and the pace of their march is rather colonial at the moment, too. The Minutemen, of course, is the representation of that particular uniform. And they carry the early muskets. There are a number of great collections of early muskets in the country, and there's a good one right there of early firearms that have been kept and taken care of, in fact, with loving care.
This group seems to have a representation of a little more elderly men participating.
The car you see is that of J. Millard Tawes, Governor of Maryland. This is the second term that Governor Tawes has had, the Democratic governor from Maryland. And a very gracious bow and a wave. Mrs. Tawes still stands as President Johnson applauds her. The governor relaxes a little quicker. This is the Leonard Hall Naval School Cadets. Direction. And the marching unit is the North High from Hagerstown, Maryland.
Secretary of the Interior Udall looks on.
Now Leonard Hall Junior Naval Academy from Leonardston, Maryland. All you people in Maryland, I promised you we'd get you in. These uniforms you can see very closely are modeled after the Annapolis ones. One thing we don't get from up here is a view of how short those young gentlemen are, but many of them appear to be just about 5 feet at the most. Flag of North Carolina, direction South Carolina, and the governor, Donald Russell.
I spent a little time with Mrs. Russell on the Whistle Stop tour.
We shall return in just a moment with our Inauguration 65 after a message from the Purex Corporation.
How far can you stretch a penny these days?
Product, so try Instant Fells tomorrow.
We're back on Pennsylvania Avenue with the Inauguration Parade 1965 as the people of America pass in honor and in tribute to President Johnson. And we're way, way up high. Passing beneath us as we go down now to, I guess, just about my favorite winter pastime, Arlene. I don't know about you. New Hampshire, the heart of some of the most beautiful skiing in the eastern U.S.
They probably thought they'd be the most comfortably dressed in the parade, all bundled up in their ski outfits. As it turned out, the temperature's in the 40s, so I guess you just can't plan these things.
We just heard from the Washington police a few moments ago, and they inform us that close to 1 million people are lining this route from Capitol Hill to here at the White House, and it would be most indicative that the all-come spirit of President Lyndon Johnson has certainly worked this afternoon. In fact, it worked so effectively in the household, in the White House itself, that is it Lucy Marlene, I think, or Linda Bird is having to sleep on a cot while 3 of her friends from Texas take over her bedroom. I'm not sure how much she approves of her father's inviting all these people and throwing her out of her bed.
Well, Lucy invited some of these people herself, so she can't blame her father. Linda Bird has 5 friends, and Lucy's, I guess, I don't know whether I should call him a fiancé. She's pinned to him, but she's a little young to have a fiancé.
Now, no dirty rumors, come on.
But anyway, he's arriving, and I guess you have to have your date stay at the White House if you're in the first family. Otherwise, getting in and out of the place is such a problem. They will be house guests there.
I think about the funniest incidents, and I'm sure Bill won't object if I relate it to you, but the security has been so strict here that we've had a great deal of difficulty getting anywhere at times, and Bill Lawrence and John Scally, 2 of our most noted correspondents here in Washington, were allowed into the White House grounds yesterday with their White House passes to go to the press room, but they couldn't go anywhere else, and I guess that's about the first time that Bill has ever been held up seriously at the White House gate. President Johnson is off again to welcome and bring greetings to more of his friends and colleagues who sit with him in the presidential stand this afternoon.
Actually, he's been very attentive to the parade as the units have been going by. He's really been giving them a hand. He and the Vice President have been having a wonderful time. And the Marines are coming.
You probably hear a voice in the background from us. In fact, you may hear a great deal of voices in the background.
There's Nicholas Katzenbach, right, acting Attorney General.
We're now just about to get into the third division of today's parade, which means that as they pass by, we get the first band, 71 members, the Marine Corps ceremonial battalions. Let's listen. Anchors away. No, correction, the hulls of Montezuma. As the U.S. Marine Corps marches by, President Johnson welcomes to his presidential box Sergeant Shriver and his family.
Very attractive children, and they certainly can't complain about the view from the parade, from that vantage point.
There's one of the Shriver children right there who suddenly just appeared behind the president, appeared almost to tap him on the back and say, "Hi, you said you all come, so I'm here."
There's his daughter. Girls don't want to be left out, even if they've been left out of the parade.
Chewing frantically. From the neighboring state of Virginia, Governor Albertus Harrison. Mrs. Harrison, paying tribute to the president. Governor Harrison is up for re-election this year, and what better way to get a look at everybody and have everybody have a look at him as an inauguration parade.
Military band goes by. Very handsome red and blue uniforms. VPI Regimental Band.
Virginia Polytechnic Institute.
Formations have been perfect, straight lines all the way.
This is the Richmond Light Infantry Blues. They're part of the Virginia National Guard. And their founding goes back to around 1789. And the Blues have worn a great many uniforms since then. They've been in service in every war since 1812.
Part of the Great Society is its emphasis on the arts. And Virginia, I believe, is the first float in the parade to give homage to the arts. That's an artmobile, a gallery on wheels. It goes through the state.
Well, here's smiling, affable Nelson Rockefeller, Governor of New York, and happy Rockefeller, his wife, waving not only to the president, but to everybody.
Well, he may be running for office again soon, who knows?
Well, indeed, and Governor Rockefeller surveying a parade route that he tried twice to take.
No, that was not Governor Nelson Rockefeller, but the president may have been thinking about him.
What we're seeing here, the Green Sabres Drum and Bugle Corps making its second appearance at a presidential inaugural parade. They're from Schuylerville, New York. Schoolerville, and of course, I should have said Schuylerville instead of Schoolerville. There goes 2 weeks' practice right down the drain.
I'm sure they'll forgive you.
New York State, who boasts itself as capital of the world.
By the way, Peter, this is the only float that's been given permission to show all the flags of the United Nations. And, of course, New York is the home of UN. It's got moving gears, and here Miss Margaret Truman Daniel is looking on with the president. She's a resident of New York at this point.
Margaret Truman is greeting Dan Moore, the governor of North Carolina, who was just elected last November. He gave Lyndon Johnson at best not the greatest support in the world, but he managed to walk that middle road between the liberals and the conservatives in North Carolina, and he literally got to the other side. We shall return to Inauguration 65 in a moment after this message from Purex. Here's one of those great views for which this capital of ours is so very famous. Capitol Hill from the other end, Pennsylvania Avenue, from where we sit at the White House. That y'all spirit we've been referring to for the last little while has gripped so many people in the city that they've over-invited to just about everything. I know that the young Democrats had quite a ball here at the Mayflower Hotel last night, and they set out 30,000 invitations, and I hated to tell their guests that the Mayflower Ballroom holds 3,000 people. So it was a bit crowded, to say the least. Arlene?
One of the sounds that you're not hearing today, not that you could hear it over the sound of the bands, is the sound of birds. The birds have been banished. The trees along the route have been bird-proofed, and I understand no starling will dare come near the vicinity for at least a year.
You know, Marlene, in the early stages of the inauguration preparation, when things were really getting going, there was some feeling one way and the other about President Johnson wearing a business suit today, and there were those traditionalists who said he should wear a morning coat, and those, of course, who supported him.
Well,
and
nobody's quarreling with Mrs. Johnson's clothes, however. She's been decked out in her favorite color, red. She's wearing a red hat, talking to Margaret Truman, who's wearing a white hat. Mrs. Johnson's been favoring American designers, and that is, I think, designed by Sophie of Saks Fifth Avenue. And there
it is, the Model T promotes the idea of outdating leukemia, which stresses the progress made in treating the disease, and health and welfare, an important part of our great society. What I was going to say there is that those people who felt that morning coats were really in order, I think would agree now that the whole day has been so relaxed, so friendly and informal that the business suit of the president looks so absolutely, totally in place.
I doubt that that's going to satisfy the tailors, but I'm sure everybody watching will agree with you. It has been fun, this parade.
Well, hope the tailors are enjoying themselves anyway.
Actually,
we have another of those. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the Johnson family is Mrs. Johnson particularly, is playing down clothes. She's not terribly concerned with her wardrobe. She is more interested in being a woman doer, and we should see a slight de-emphasis on clothing in the White House in the next few years.
President Johnson talking to Margaret Truman, her husband, in the presidential box. As we look down Pennsylvania Avenue once again, that camera position of ours in which you see that particular shot, incidentally, is what we call our lamppost position. And it's stuck way out over the street, hanging on a lamppost. And we put a very brave cameraman on there who swings back and forth.
You can see some baton twirlers coming up the street. The leaders of these marching units have really been terrific. I'm sure each state has sent its best.
Well, he's still a bit far off, but I think, Marlene, if I can see properly from here, that's Philip Hoff, the governor, the Democratic governor of Vermont, waving to his friends and to his supporters.
This parade has been very well coordinated. Actually, we had visions of the wrong governor getting in front of the wrong state unit.
It is Governor Philip M. Hoff of Vermont, the state for which President Johnson carries the rare distinction of being the only Democrat in history to carry that state. And there's a friendly exchange. Governor Hoff has his wife with him, and
President's applauding back. He's been returning the applause of the governors. Governor Hoff is a very young man, evidently.
Now approaching the grandstand area, the high school band from Montpelier, Vermont is making its first appearance today.
Big treat for some high school students who are marching in the band that's coming along.
In October 1963, when he visited the state of Vermont as vice president. This group has been selected to play at 3 all-state time football games between high schools from Vermont and New Hampshire, and has appeared in every New England state and Canada. Members of the unit are wearing
In just a few moments, Howard K. Smith and Edward P. Morgan are going to come and sit in for Marlene and I when we go downstairs and visit a little green room that we'll tell you a little later on that ABC has here. So Howard and Ed will sit in, and we will continue ABC's inauguration coverage after this pause for station identification.
From Washington, D.C., ABC News is bringing you Inauguration 65, a complete report and commentary on the inauguration of Lyndon Baines Johnson as the 36th President of the United States of America. Reported by Howard K. Smith, Edward P. Morgan, Peter Jennings, and Marlene Sanders, leading the ABC News team. Inauguration 65 is being brought to you by Purex, maker of fine products for your home. This famous Purex trademark is your guarantee of best quality. When women speak, Purex listens. That's why we say you'll find the woman's touch in every Purex product. Here now are ABC's Howard K. Smith and Edward P. Morgan at the White House.
The last state delegation to pass was probably one that President Johnson most grateful for of all. It was the state of Vermont, which in 175 years had never voted for a Democratic president, but did it for him. Now this is the state of Kentucky down here. The state of Kentucky is producing its best and fairest, and we are watching Kentucky come up here with the girls, the drum majorettes and a drum major preceding them. Very pretty little girls.
The truth be known, Howard, we're really just getting our breath after making a parade route of our own behind the main parade to get from the ABC booth at the Capitol to the one up here at the White House where our two colleagues have been holding forth.
Version of my old Kentucky home.
The President's expression is vastly different from what it was this morning. It was thoughtful, and this afternoon, it is gay as can be.
We have a bulletin. Lord Moran returned to the bedside of Sir Winston Churchill in London. It was the elderly doctor's third visit of today.
What you are seeing there on the camera is a shot of the President of the United States munching what we are told are hot hors d'oeuvres. They're being sold, not sold, but served to some of the White House press across the road. No discrimination necessarily intended, but we just have ordinary bologna sandwiches up here in the booth.
Well, Tennessee's paraders are coming by the president now. The state flag, the state banner is passing in front of him while he's munching, and there in the car is Governor Frank Clement, who was the governor some time ago who made the keynote speech in the Democratic Convention of what, 1956?
1956, in which he said, how long, America? And what he really said there, Howard, to make a little sense, although the phrase may not remain in history, was how long, America, must we look down the long green fairways of indifference, referring to Eisenhower's predilection to the golf course.
This is an unusually handsome row of drum majorettes. I don't know how they do it, how they successfully resist the cold.
One wonders what the real efficacy is of this part of our American folklore, the training of drum majorettes. What do they grow up to be?
What is the efficacy of a good time?
ROTC marching unit from Tennessee A&I University, known as the Tiger Jets.
University of Tennessee's band making its second inaugural appearance. First time was in 1953 for President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The float, which is coming into view off there in the distance, has a great big scholar's cap on it, a graduation cap, the state seal on top of it. It's a mortar board alongside two books, the titles Education and Pathway to the Future, a sentiment that President Johnson would most surely agree with.
Not to mention the State Chamber of Commerce motto, Abundant Tennessee. Coming up next is the contingent from the state of Ohio. Tennessee just now actually having passed the presidential reviewing stand. The governor of Ohio and the senator, senior senator, Frank Lausche, former governor, standing up in the car to give the salutes to the president.
President Johnson still munching, eating, applauding. Those hands, which were so sore, they were swollen the last time I saw him just before Christmas from shaking hands, are going to be sore and swollen from applauding for 3 hours here today. Now, this is the Louisiana part of the parade. This reporter comes from the sovereign state of Louisiana, as it is euphemistically called. In fact, it is not sovereign. The band is the Washita Parish High School Band, the school that this reporter went to as a boy. It's from Monroe, Louisiana.
Senator Dirksen is looking over the parade route now. He wanted to be an actor when he started out his career, and in some respects he has fulfilled that wish, being one of the dramatic actors of the United States Congress, first the House and now a minority leader in the Senate.
This is silly, this thing.
And there the vice president, not elect anymore, but the vice president in residence of the United States. The first time we've had a living vice president since November 22nd, 1963. Howard, I can fully well sympathize with your loyalty to the state of Louisiana, but apparently before we get to them proper, we've still got some beautiful Ohio contingents that are just going past. What in the world is this?
We have a report. The Army Command Post advises that this parade will definitely conclude before dark. Colonel Ray Levan, who's in charge, said that he would do that. And this is the governor of Louisiana, the governor of the state of Louisiana, McKiffin. And there's the Washita Parish High School Band from my alma mater, which we were talking about a short while ago, and I talked about prematurely. From Monroe, Louisiana.
In all fairness, I think that they should turn and salute you after saluting the president, Howard.
I don't think I could get a visa to get back in, Ed. There's no Louisiana float. Monroe's up in the northern part of Louisiana. Washita is a river which rises, in fact, in Arkansas, but reaches its greatest breadth there in North Louisiana. There's the president behind that glass we've heard so much about and talked so much about. This is his day, and he's enjoying it. Rather, it's partly his day. It's also Hubert Humphrey's day, and in a way, I would wager that Hubert Humphrey is the happiest man present in any of these ceremonies. Now there is a lull in the parade as the governor of Indiana is approaching.
There's no lull as far as the governor himself is concerned. Governor Roger Brannigan, who succeeds Governor Welch of the same Democratic affiliation, but it was a near thing, supposedly. That was one of the doubtful states. But thanks partly to the firm coattails of LBJ, Governor Brannigan came in. He's described himself, the governor has, as being comfortably located in the political philosophy of Lyndon B. Johnson. There the president is turning to... behind him there is Jack Valenti, his aide, one of the most dapper, sartorially turned out men in the White House staff. The president now moved away from his main box to see other guests in this White House reviewing stand.
There's
Billy Graham is right behind him. If we are being redundant, Howard Smith and I, you will forgive us a little because we have not seen this procedure, but we are informed that the president has made a habit of getting up from his seat and going out into the wings and up into the other tiers to greet his guests.
A long time ago, a couple wrote a book about Middletown, a sociological study of America in the 1930s, and this town was really Muncie, Indiana. And Muncie, Indiana's college is the one which is now demonstrating there in front of the president right now. You see the two drum majorettes in scarlet spangled uniforms playing Hello, Dolly, which in fact has been rechristened for political purposes, Hello, Lyndon. This is the first band today to play that, by the way. During the convention, you couldn't stop them, but this is the first time we've heard it today.
Demonstrations like this that make the manufacturers of musical instruments rub their hands in enthusiasm and gratitude.
This is not the first time, I'm sure, that Yankee Doodle Dandy has been heard today. I've heard it twice in just a few minutes.
And here come, I believe, the Black Horse Troop of Culver Military Academy.
Culver students riding those horses, that's rare to see in a parade these days. There are two parades going on, one parade in front of the president, the other one is his parade. He's parading in the stands. No pair of hands will remain unshaken if he can help it. That's Willard Wirtz, the Secretary of Labor he was talking to there from Chicago, a man with whom he's established very close and friendly relations and on whom he depends heavily.
He wrote a good deal of his speeches during the campaign, as he did for Adlai Stevenson in 52 and 56. The Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, is peeking out from behind that pillar. The president is talking to him with that typical four-finger gesture of the man from Texas. His chief of the White House Secret Service detail, Rufus Youngboat, is the man following him like his shadow.
There, the presidential parade in the stands continues while the presidential parade in front of the stands goes on. The president just passed beneath his own seal, the seal of the president. He's returning now to his place there where he will see a little more of the parade, it is assumed. I think that Mississippi is the next delegation to pass by.
The Sacred Heart High School girl, Gilda Band of Biloxi, Mississippi, is making...
Governor Paul Johnson was supposed to be in that car, but I think he turned down the honor.
Yes, it just says Mississippi. It doesn't say the governor of Mississippi on the car.
Mississippi was carried by Goldwater stronger than Lyndon Johnson carried any state in the Union, better than 87% of the vote. We'll return to Inauguration 65 after a message from the Purex Corporation.
The contingents from the state of Mississippi, which went Republican in 1964 November, are still passing the reviewing stand. The president has resumed his post behind the bulletproof glass. Little good it would do him, really, because he has been all over that stand this afternoon. There goes the float in the space age from the state of Mississippi. Many of the space installations, the space administration installations are being put in Mississippi, Howard.
Yet there's Governor Otto Kerner of Illinois, a man who was certainly carried into office by the Johnson landslide. He was not favored to defeat Charles Percy, but he did, and largely thanks to the big vote that President Johnson got. The president returned briefly his wave and then looked the other way to carry on his own LBJ parade.
Which raises the question of what happens to Charles Percy, a defeated but attractive, youthful Republican candidate. He may come back along with Robert Taft Jr. There's the president. And Mrs. Johnson just darting in there on the left of the screen. Secretary Wirtz saying goodbye to Vice President Humphrey.
That's Mrs. Wirtz facing us there. There's Orville Freeman, I believe, behind the President, the Secretary of Agriculture.
Mrs. Humphrey.
All these people are protégés of Hubert Humphrey. Eugene McCarthy was, Orville Freeman was, and now the new senator is. So Hubert Humphrey really has quite a following in Washington, D.C., in high positions.
We've got something coming up here in the livestock situation.
Mrs. Orville Freeman there, the handsome lady who was in profile, now facing the camera.
One of our more meaningless remarks today was regarding the beagle in the White House, but here is something called Omar, a St. Bernard dog who has paced the band of the Chicago Fire Department for 4 years. It wasn't possible to see whether he had brandy under his chin or not. He had a hat on his head, a Texas hat.
The band is the Chicago Fire Department's band, 120 members. And the effects include a siren, we need not tell you, bells and fire extinguishers.
Chicago's Mayor Dick Daley was one of the very first, his robust cheeks shining like the sun, one of the very first dignitaries to arrive at the Capitol this morning for the ceremonies, along with his wife, who was wearing a blue bonnet.
Yeah, notice the puffs of smoke coming up from behind the F in that. Fires back there. The camera was on them. They'll come right into the camera again.
Happily innocuous puffs of smoke. In this case, where there's smoke, there's not necessarily fire.
This looks like the Temple of the Shriners, Medina Temple of the Shriners of Chicago in the state of Illinois. The commander rides a white horse, and all the others are mounted on black steeds. Weren't for parades and television cowboy programs, we wouldn't have any use for horses anymore.